Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into 5 incredibly chilling cold cases that were finally solved decades later. It really goes to show that finding the truth isn't always the exact same thing as cinematic justice, you know? For the families left behind, hearing, "We think this case will never be solved," is an all too common, heartbreaking reality. But then, the year 2020 came along and absolutely changed everything for 5 distinct mysteries. Okay, let's just get right into this. I want you to imagine waiting an agonizing 56 years for a single answer. Unimaginable, right? Well, today we're unpacking exactly how rapid scientific advancements and, in one seriously bizarre instance, a sudden, out-of-the-blue confession are literally unearthing ghosts from as far back as the 1960s. We're going to explore how these massive breakthroughs actually happen, and, crucially, the really complex emotional fallout that hits when the truth finally comes to light after so much time has passed. Section 1. DNA Rights a Past Wrong, the tragic case of Christine Jessup. Let's start with one of Canada's most notorious cold cases from 1984. So picture this. It's October of 1984. 9-year-old Christine Jessup vanishes from her home near Toronto while her mom and brother are out visiting her dad. Just 3 months later, her body is found 31 miles away. Naturally, the police were absolutely desperate to close this terrifying case, but that eagerness led to a disastrous wrongful conviction. And this perfectly illustrates the devastating passage of time. A guy named Guy Paul Morin, who happened to be Christine's next-door neighbor, was arrested in 1985. It took a mistrial, multiple appeals, and a first-degree murder conviction in 1992 before DNA evidence finally proved he didn't do it. He spent 18 agonizing months in prison. It literally took almost 4 decades for science to definitively clear this innocent man and point to the actual culprit. To understand how this 2020 breakthrough finally happened after the police hit a total brick wall, we really have to talk about genetic genealogy. Investigators took degraded semen residue found on Christine's clothing and sent it to a highly specialized lab called Othram Incorporated. By extracting a microscopic DNA profile and running it through public databases like GDmatch, they weren't just looking for a simple, direct match. Instead, it's like a giant puzzle. They mapped out entire family trees to zero in on their suspect. The contrast here is honestly horrifying. While Guy Paul Morin suffered for years under the heavy shadow of suspicion, the actual killer, Calvin Hoover, was just hiding in plain sight. Hoover was a friend of the family. He visited their home, he actively participated in the search parties for little Christine, and incredibly, he even attended her wake and funeral. No way, right? But in a really tragic twist of delayed justice, Hoover actually died by suicide in 2015, which means he is never going to face a trial for what he did. Section 2. A Valentine's Nightmare, Carla Jan Walker's 46-year mystery. Let's travel down to Fort Worth, Texas in 1974. 17-year-old popular cheerleader Carla Jan Walker was sitting in a bowling alley parking lot with her boyfriend Rodney, just hanging out after a Valentine's Day dance. Suddenly, the passenger door is yanked wide open. Rodney is beaten unconscious with a pistol, and Carla is abducted right there in front of him. For 46 years, the trail was completely cold. Carla's body was found 3 days later. She had been held captive, injected with morphine, and strangled. It's truly awful. And despite generating over 200 tips, the text simply didn't exist back then to analyze the DNA left behind. That is, until 2020, when cutting-edge sequencing on Carla's bra finally linked back to one of the original suspects, Glenn Samuel McCurley. Get this. He had lived less than a mile away the entire time. Police finally slapped cuffs on him at the age of 77. The absolutely crucial point to take away here is the immense, almost indescribable relief felt by families who have literally waited half a lifetime for answers. That feeling is captured so perfectly by Carla's brother Jim, you can just hear the weight lifting off his shoulders. And this closure came even as McCurley, once he was finally caught, tried to bizarrely tell investigators that he didn't murder Carla, but rather was somehow saving her from her boyfriend that night in the parking lot. Yare. Section 3. Betrayal by Familiar Faces, Fawn Cox and the Enemy Within. Now, our third case really shows how finding the truth can be a serious double-edged sword. In the summer of 1989, 16-year-old Fawn Cox came home to Kansas City after her shift at an amusement park. The very next morning, her younger sister found her dead in her bedroom, her morning alarm just blaring. Fawn was actually attacked in her own bed. The killer had slipped quietly through her window, and the loud hum of the household's window air conditioning units masked any noise of the struggle. For over 3 decades, her family hosted fundraisers, desperate to afford the advanced DNA testing that the local police department just couldn't cover. Finally, in 2020, the FBI stepped in to fully fund the analysis. The results? An absolutely profound shock for the family. The testing proved that the killer wasn't some random stranger peering through a window. It was her very own cousin, Donald Cox Jr. And adding to the incredibly complex layers of this tragedy, Donald had already died of a drug overdose back in 2006. Fawn's sister actually noted that while they finally had that elusive closure, the answers left a very bitter taste. It just goes to show that resolution isn't always exactly what you ask for. Section 4. Chasing a 1960s Ghost. The 56-year wait for Margaret Peggy Beck. We're escalating now to the oldest cold case ever solved by genetic genealogy. This one takes us all the way back to a Girl Scout camp in the remote Colorado wilderness in August of 1963. 16-year-old counselor Margaret Peggy Beck went to sleep in her tent alone because her tent mate was stuck in the infirmary with a cold. An incredible 56 years passed between Peggy's death and the moment investigators finally put a name to her killer. Because she put up a fierce fight, skin cells were found under her fingernails. But get this, it took until 2007 just to extract a viable profile, and until 2019 to trace that profile to a specific family tree. They finally identified a man named James Raymond Taylor in 2020. Now, here's the incredibly frustrating, open-ended reality of historical cold cases. While investigators finally identified Taylor, they immediately hit a massive roadblock. The guy literally vanished in 1976. Taylor was a TV and radio repairman who knew that remote camp area really well, but his last known location was Las Vegas. Today, he'd be in his late 80s, and honestly, authorities don't even know if he's still alive to put handcuffs on him. Section 5. A shocking terminal confession. Christopher Alvin Daly's 1995 case. For our final case today, we are pivoting entirely away from scientific breakthroughs to a really bizarre human anomaly. In April of 1995 in Huntsville, Alabama, 26-year-old Christopher Daly was found dead from a single gunshot wound. His car was partially submerged in the Tennessee River, with a heavy rock actually tied to the accelerator. For 25 solid years, detectives called it a real whodunit, with absolutely zero leads. Then, out of nowhere, in November 2020, Detective Sean McAdam receives a phone call that he initially thought was just a crank call. The caller, Johnny Dwight Whited, wanted to confess to a murder he committed decades ago, but he couldn't quite remember the exact year. Detectives had to scramble to match the vague details Whited was giving them to their unsolved files, eventually realizing he was describing Christopher Daly. Whited even rode in a patrol car and directed the detective to the exact spot where that car went into the river. So, why confess now? Well, Whited was facing a terminal stage 4 lung cancer diagnosis, and he finally wanted to clear his heavy conscience. He actually admitted he didn't even know Christopher before he killed him. While the confession finally brings answers, it also left detectives like Mukadam completely stunned and deeply frustrated by the decades of totally unnecessary silence. He noted that illness is no excuse, and Whited could have easily spared the family 25 years of pure agony. Section 6. The complex reality of closure. What happens when the truth is found too late? Let's move to our conclusion and see how all of this builds to a sobering realization about the nature of modern detective work. We're obviously in a golden age of solving the unsolvable, but that doesn't always translate to those neat, tidy endings we see in movies. Out of these 5 newly solved mysteries, spanning a combined total of almost 2 entire centuries, just think about the status of the killers. 3 of them were either already dead or missing entirely. Only 2 cases resulted in a living suspect actually being put behind bars. Science gave these families a name, yes, but for many, it totally denied them a traditional courtroom reckoning. So, the absolutely crucial point we're left with in this explainer is this. As science and genealogy databases aggressively uncover the ghosts of our past, we are firmly entering a new era of criminal justice. But we have to ask ourselves, when the killer is already gone, but the mystery is finally solved, is knowing the truth enough? Is closure truly the exact same thing as justice? It's a really heavy question, and it's one that more and more families are going to have to face in the years to come.